Cool. So I just want to make sure that you guys can hear me and that the music is not in the way. Perfect. So welcome to Mentorship and Coaching. My name is Marco Garganta, and I'm with PlusPlus, and I'll be sharing what we're seeing in this space with you today. So let's get started. So just a little bit of a backstory why I am on stage and talking about this. So in my previous life, I used to run a software training company, which means we would go to very large, mostly technology companies, and work with their engineers on getting them to the next level, adopting open source technologies, things like that. So we would work with Intel, Cisco, Qualcomm, Motorola, DoD, very large tech companies. And then in 2013, Twitter, a much smaller version of Twitter, acquired us, and we became a Twitter University, which was an internal program with the promise of enabling engineers to do their best work. And that involved a whole number of things, from onboarding to peer learning, collaborative learning, to technical leadership development, to technical documentation, as well as mentorship, coaching, and office hours. And so this is a part of a bigger story. Today, we're talking about specifically mentorship and coaching aspects of that. In 2018, 20 timeframe, we noticed that we're not alone. Other leaders at tech companies, mostly tech companies, also had a challenge of how do we enable our engineers and our technical folks to do their best work. And so we got together, I got together with my peers from LinkedIn and Salesforce, and we formed Technocon. So Technocon was a conference where we would get together and share stories. It was an industry conference. So basically your peers talking and sharing their stories with one another. We started in 2018 at LinkedIn, and this was a 2019 edition that was hosted by Twitter. And then pandemic hit, so since 2020, we've been doing this online. So every month we have a roundtable, and you can join. It's free. Like I said, it's your peers, so it's peer-led, and we're learning from one another. There's a talk coming up next week, and Shopify is going to talk about how they do employee enablement at scale. So that's a little bit about Technocon. Tomomi will share a link if you're not a part of the group, or you can join the community easily. We have a pretty active Slack channel and a monthly roundtable. So as I mentioned, through this talk today, I'm going to talk from my experience and also share experiences in the industry that I'm seeing from people that are members of Technocon, companies that are participating and sharing their ideas. So we talk about tech enablement as sort of this umbrella of activities that companies do to enable their employees to be the best version of themselves. And I mentioned earlier that includes a number of different activities, from onboarding to collaborative and peer learning to leadership development and mentorship coaching, guides and tutorials, early documentation, and then closing the loop with metrics and insights. So getting a feedback loop on what's working, how well things are working, and where we can improve. So we PlusPlus, we have basically a webinar series that covers different topics that are part of this broader umbrella we call tech enablement. And so today we're talking about mentorship and coaching. So before we dive in, I just want to unpack what we mean by mentorship and coaching, because we're seeing these words be overloaded in the industry. Different people have different conception. And so we're going to cover 5 different aspects. We're going to talk about the buddy system, peer mentorship, professional coaching, office hours, and forums. So those are the 5 distinct, very different approaches to what is otherwise an ad hoc small group or one-on-one get-together to exchange knowledge and learn from one another. So with that, let's start with the buddy system. Buddy system is fairly common. Almost every company does it. It's almost exclusively used for onboarding. So basically, if I'm a new hire and I join your company, and I need to understand how you do things and how your stack works, and if the company doesn't have a lot of this bottled up in the documentation, which is usually the case, then assigning a buddy is one of the low-hanging fruits. It's an easy way to do that. So like I said, it's a white glove onboarding experience, mostly for new hires. That's where it's prominently used. So usually the mentee is the new hire, and the mentor tends to be somebody who's been with a company for a longer time. It could be a person on a team if it's a engineering manager on that team that is responsible for onboarding, or it could be from a pool of internal experts if it's more of a onboarding somebody onto a company-wide how things work. And this varies from culture to culture that you have in a company. So we've seen organizations where joining org is more important than joining the team. I saw somebody from Ruchika from Meta, and I know definitely when I compare Twitter and Meta, we had different approaches. Twitter was much more every team on their own, and every engineering manager had their own sort of approach to how they do onboarding, and so it was very uneven across the board, and so everyone was coming up with their own. Hello, me again. Sorry about that. We're having some weather-related internet issues. Can everyone see me? Yeah? Cool. Awesome. All right. So at least the power is still on. So hello from California. Let's talk about the buddy system. So why do we do the buddy system? So it's basically a time to competency usually for a new hire. So if I just joined a company or a team, how do I quickly learn how you do things there and how your stack works, right? And so one of the easiest ways is to assign an all-timer to me, and it's usually done by either a hiring manager or at an org level if it's a little bit more, and the focus is more to be nimble across the entire organization. So usually this is done very early on. So buddy system makes sense in the first weeks, or if not months, of a new hire joining. So that's where we see this be the most valuable. And like I said, it's fairly simple to implement and broadly used across the industry. So usually the cadence is frequent, so it daily, if not weekly. So the idea is to join the mentee and the mentor at a hip and have them have frequent check-ins. So it could be a quick check-in on Slack. Hey, what are you going to work on today? Or here's a document that you should read next. It could be that a mentee is simply available to a mentor is simply available to mentee, so that you have the to-go-to person to ask questions. Sometimes this could also look as pair programming. So mentor and mentee really truly pair up at the same quote-unquote desk for some period of time until they learn from one another and enable one another. So that's kind of how we've seen this pan out. This is as I mentioned, we share stories through this. And these stories mostly come from TechnoCon members that share them as they were kind of unlocking certain capabilities themselves. So in this case, this is a story of Carbon Health. So Carbon Health during pandemic experienced extreme rapid growth in engineering. So they went from 5 to 90 engineers in something like 7 months. So they were basically adding a lot of people. And as you can imagine, a 5-person engineering team did not have a lot of documentation. And a rapidly growing engineering team did not have time to document things. So they had to rely on things that were, they had to basically really quickly figure things out as in motion. So they tried to raise the bar for documentation, but in the meantime, they were also relying heavily on human relationships. So it's tempting to just say, hey, great docs would solve everything. But if you can imagine the beginnings of remote work and rapid growth, you would essentially lose culture if you didn't have that human aspect of things. So it's not just the knowledge, it's also the social networks, figuring out how things work and how we work. So that is something that tends to be misvalued if a program is designed in vacuum. So human relationships have a lot of value. So this is a story. By the way, we will be sharing this deck afterwards, so you will have an opportunity to read the stories. So there's a link on the bottom of every single one of them, and what it does is it opens a full transcription of that talk, and usually may contain even the video recording at the end, and you can actually watch it and hear it from the horse's mouth. So look out for that email afterwards. So moving on, the other way of mentoring or coaching one another is so-called peer mentorship. And so this is when within an organization, mentor and mentee connect. It almost looks like a marketplace for mentor and mentee. So let's look what that is. So it's usually unbiased. It's a longer term. It's about career growth. So it's not about onboarding as in the buddy system, and it's not necessarily the manager support. So often in a company we may hear, well, it's manager's job to get me up to speed. It's manager's job to coach me, etc., etc. Well, what if I'm curious about other aspects of work? What if I'm curious about that other team? Maybe I'm a backend engineer. I want to know more about design, or I want to know more about leadership. How do I learn that? My manager may not be A, the right person, B, have the right motivation to support that. So this is where peer mentorship crosses concerns, so crosses the boundaries of a team or even the org, and allows a mentee to explore and grow professionally, and through that feel better about seeing the organization in more holistic terms. So the mentee usually wants to grow their career, like as we said, and the mentor is somebody who is already in that seat, but it may be organizationally distant. So for example, they usually are not in the same reporting team. So as I mentioned, an example, maybe I'm an engineer and I'm really curious about design or product management. And in that case, I may want to explore those availabilities. So making that easy is important. So why would they do it? It's really about career growth. So peer mentorship, that's my primary purpose. So this would help your company be known as the place where people want to work because they are finally supported professionally. This usually happens, the time frame for this is usually when a mentee is leaning into moving into a different space. So it's whereas the buddy system was very interesting early on when a company was just starting, when employee was just starting with the company. Peer mentorship is more to keep the employee there. It's really a longer term, and it makes them feel good about the place that they chose to work at. Usually it's 6 months or so. It could be as long as a year, and there's some rotation built in. So I may be curious about one role, but then I want to explore something else because I'm unsure exactly what else is available. So that's the beauty of peer mentorship. It makes it easy to pick and choose and to have the novelty factor as well. Mentor mentee don't need to meet as frequently. So it could be weekly, it could be monthly, as opposed to daily versus weekly. And through that, they get to know each other's relationship. Mentor gets to also get to know mentee a little better, and it can also hold them accountable if it's a longer arc of getting up to speed on certain new skills, for example. And mentee gets to observe, not just learn from mentor, but also observe how mentor is in their shoes over a longer period of time. So the point here is that it's relatively longer compared to buddy system, at least. So the example of this that comes to mind is Airbnb. So a while back, we worked with Airbnb to build their peer learning program. So they had data university, they had their leadership program, they had a number of different programs which were based on internal experts standing up workshops and learning from one another. And then somebody had the idea, well, what if we did something similar to peer learning, and we did it for peer mentorship? So in other words, anyone can become a mentor, and then they can open up sessions, people can discover them, knock at the door, and sign up. And so we built a platform to do exactly that. And so they shared at Technicon, after the first year of deployment, the numbers. And so basically within a year, they had 10% of employees become mentors. So basically at the time there were 5,000 people. So about 500 people became mentors, and they had hundreds of sessions open during that time. It was a a highly rated program. What they did to make somebody to have somebody be a mentor was have them go through a certain learning. So in other words, I can't just become a mentor on the platform. I would have to go through a workshop on how to be a mentor. And so that workshop was about 4 hours. And at the end of that workshop, I would be certified and appear on a platform as somebody who can open up mentorship sessions. So Anna, who led that program, she spoke on stage at Technicon. And so that's her story. And you can learn more about how that panned out for them at Airbnb. But at the time, it was a very popular program. And Tomomi also shared that we have a blog site called Ideas. So after the talk, we usually transcribe it and make it available there as well. So if you don't have half an hour to listen to a talk, you can just read an article if that's more of your cup of tea. So that was Airbnb and their peer mentorship program. So that was the second example. So we're talking about buddy system and peer mentorship, and now we're getting to our third example, which is situational coaching. So situational coaching is much more of a in the flow of work, right? So if I'm so what it is basically it's a mid-term mentorship on a complex project. So I am an expert. I'm adopting a project. I'm working on something. And so I'm looking for very much help with that something that in terms of complexity, in terms of technology, in terms of how to, right? So mentee is usually taking on a lead on a project. And so they're trying to tackle it on their own. They haven't maybe used the technology or the stack before. They just don't have the hands-on experience. They would partner up with a mentor who is a subject matter expert, has had experience in that particular space, and is able to help them be there available for them to unlock them as they get blocked, as they run into issues that were maybe not predictable or poorly documented ahead of time. So by doing this, you increase basically the likelihood of a project being a success, because the project lead who hasn't done it before, when they get stuck, they have a place to go and get unstuck. So that's basically the big deal about situational coaching. Usually it's done as a support on a specific project. So if you are launching a project and you have people on the project who are relatively new to it and they're leading it, so providing a pathway for them to have somebody to ask questions is a big deal. And usually we see this be rolled during a project, but it could also be an ongoing concern, especially if more and more people are going to be onboarding that specific technology or stack or workflow. So the way this manifests itself is that the mentors shepherd mentees early on, so they may kick off the project, but then they're also available on more of an interrupt basis. So in other words, if I'm as a mentee, if I'm working on a project, I get stuck, providing a way for me to tap on the shoulder and say, hey, I need help here. This is my situation, right? And how would I go about that? So that's what the situational coaching is really what it's all about. So, so I wanted to share a story similar to Airbnb. Shopify spoke about this at Technicon. So long time ago, Toby, the founder of Shopify, he had a personal coach, and he found that this person really made a difference for him. And he then thought, well, if it's such a big impact for me, I'm going to bring this coach for my entire executive team. And so he did that, and that worked really well. And then they, as a leadership team, thought, well, can we introduce coaching to everyone at the company? And at the time, the company was about 4,000 people. So they essentially ended up building a bench of professional coaches. So people who are, that's all they do. They're just coaches. And so they went and they hired about, I believe, 12 people at the time, and had them coach one another. And the program was called Coach's Corner. And it was available to everyone. So it was fully democratized company-wide. So that's where it's similar to Airbnb. Where it's different is that it was led by professionals. So in other words, you had professional coaches. And so as such, it was less about peer coaching. Hey, I want to learn how to become a better designer, for example, but it was more about getting coaching on things that relate to either my capability doing work as a manager, so how to manage, for example, how to lead, that sort of thing, or some kind of performance skills for individual contributors. So this was also a program that's been in Shopify for a while and very successful. And if you wanted to read the whole story, you could find it on Ideas. So we're now talking about office hours, and this is more of a situational help. So as opposed to having a person that I can tap on the shoulder, I have a place where I can basically walk in and get my questions answered. So it's just in time. It feels like mentorship. It feels like situational coaching, and it's very specific to a problem or a task. So it's kind of like a doctor's office, right? I have a problem, and I'm just walking in to get it resolved. So mentee is dealing with a challenge. They're not sure how to go about that. Subject matter expert is not available on interrupt basis, but rather hosts regular sessions. So the way this usually pans out is that these sessions look like office hours, and they're meant to unblock the mentee to get unblocked quickly. So again, in this particular case, where our goal is not to teach them how to fish, our goal is to give them fish. They just want to solve the problem. They just want to keep moving forward, and we're just there to unblock them. So usually it's whenever the mentee is stuck, and for how long is, it could be a quick fix. So it's basically a quick answer, directing them to a specific direction. But it's a one-time, it's very transactional, it's a short-lived experience. What we've seen is that this usually works well as well when a team is supporting office hours. So for example, if I run a platform team and my team owns a key library that a lot of people use or a key service, then offering regular office hours and maybe having a team rotation on it provides for a frequent coverage without interrupts, right? So basically I would have somebody on office hours coverage. People would know where to knock at the door and get their questions resolved. So as I mentioned, office hours, it's usually a one-time, it's usually very specific and micro in nature. We're just there to give them fish. We're not there to teach them how to fish in this particular case. So an example that comes to mind, again, from Technicon is Netflix Studios. So Netflix Studios was always heavily invested in live learning. So what they do is they support a very large number of content creators. So Netflix has, call it 10,000 contractors out there building miniseries and working on other things like that for the company. Right. And in the past, they would do workshops and people would just come. And so there was a lot of camaraderie. There was a lot of sidebar conversations. There was a lot of other things that happened during those workshops. When the pandemic hit, they had this brilliant insight. Hey, we're Netflix, we're about video. Can't we move a lot of these workshops into the video? And so they did. And so they basically moved a lot of live content into self-paced content. This worked well initially, but then what they started observing is that they were losing the human touch. So people who were consuming their learning felt disconnected, didn't know who to go to for help, didn't have all these social aspects of how things work. And there was a lot that was missed in purely flipping the slides. So what Netflix decided to do is bring back some of that human touch. And the way they did it is through they call them AMA sessions. So Ask Me Anything sessions. So essentially it's a branded version of your classic office hours. So they would run those sessions, people would join the sessions, and that's where me as an external, say, contractor building a mini series, I can meet the team. So on the other side would be the team that was supporting one of dozens of internal tools that I would need to use. And through that, I would get to meet the team and see the people behind the curtain. And the team would also get to build empathy for the users themselves. So that was very valuable to them. So that's the story of Netflix Studios. Our final type of mentorship we're going to talk about is forums. And so essentially, in a nutshell, this is a closed group of peers. So we're all equals, and we don't necessarily allow transient people to come in and out. So forums exist to provide experiential learning and sharing with one another. So the idea is that we are stable for a longer period of time, and that we come together with the objective of learning from one another. And unlike classical mentor-mentee relationship, in a forum, everyone's a mentee and everyone's a mentor. So we're constantly exchanging data and learning from peers, essentially. So typically the shape of a forum is a small group. It's usually 7 ± 2 people. That just tends to be a dynamic of small group that works. It's important to have a safety. So what that means is you don't want your manager probably in a forum. You don't want people from your team in the forum. You want to have ability to share freely, not feel judged, not feel somebody's going to be talking about you somewhere else, and so on. So that level of safety is important, so that you can open up, kind of get into deeper and deeper levels of connectedness to other forum mates. So that's what a forum is. The reason why it exists is so that we can learn from one another, because if I'm dealing with a challenge and you're my peer, you probably either have dealt with a challenge or you're going to. So the goal is really to create a safe and trusting environment so that we can get more intimacy with one another, so that we can peel the onion and get deeper and deeper through that. Forums can happen at any time. They don't make a lot of sense for onboarding, because onboarding tends to be A, transitory, but B, we don't have a lot of relatedness just yet. So they make sense for people who've been with the company for a while. And they usually are longer running. So usually it's once a month or every 6 weeks. And the arc of a forum tends to be many years. I've personally been in a forum with a number of CEOs for about 15 years. It's 8 of us. And so we've been doing this for a very long time. And it gets magical once people gel into one. So, like I said, typical group meet is 7 ± 2 people, so 5 to 9. Meets usually once a month, and the goal is to build trust. And the way we share is by figuring out updates first. So we basically start by updating one another what happened. And when we look at updates, we look at just the top and bottom 5%, like the best things and the worst things that happened previous month, both professionally and personally. Right, so it's very holistic, and then the main thing is presentation. So basically, sharing with one another from the stance of experiences. So tell me a time when you had to deal with a similar issue as I'm dealing with right now. And so by sharing, that's what we learn. So I've implemented this at Twitter for engineering managers. So we noticed that after we would train engineers to become engineering managers, great. We dumped a whole bunch of knowledge onto them and they start doing the real work. But as they do the real work, they run into real problems. So where do they go for help? So we provided group coaching through forums at Twitter. This particular story is from Technocon, and it's from Autodesk. So Autodesk did something very, very similar. So they also observed, separately from us, that their newly minted engineering managers, particularly, did not have all the needed skills. And once rubber meets the road, they had issues. They didn't know how to resolve. So they created a forum that would meet and have a parking lot of where you can bring those issues. One thing that they did slightly differently than us is they also had a senior person as part of the forum. So they would basically match one of the directors to be a moderator in the forum. So that more, it's kind of like the Napoleon Hill's mastermind group. So there would be an expert and a number of peers right below them. So that expert would worry about moderating the story. So that's kind of how Autodesk did that. So those were the 5 things that we wanted to talk about. So buddy system, peer mentorship, office hours, and then we had career, longer-term situational mentorship, and we had the forums as 5 different approaches. So what I wanted to show you now is what that might look like in practice. And for that, I'll just use our own platform. So we have a demo site here with PlusPlus. So as you can see, I have people. So we have a whole bunch of people, and I can filter people based on certain criteria. So for example, I could go here and say, I'm looking for just those that want to do it all in person or on site for specific locations, specific expertise, and specific title, and so on. And as I find people, then I can go and dig deeper. So Amy Richardson, for example, I can see that she's a senior software engineer. I can see her bio, what other mentees said about her. I can see that her manager is Michael. If I wanted to see more about Michael, I can click on that. I can also see the teammates. So who does Amy work with? Oh, okay, these are Amy's co-workers. So I get a sense a little bit about what kind of projects and what kind of impact Amy has. I can also see her sessions and so forth. A couple of things we're working on next is also looking at impact. So what's been Amy's impact on the company, and more specifically on mentees over the past how many months she's been doing this, and I can see a little bit of this in addition to testimonials and other data. So the goal here is to help us form an opinion. Is Amy the right person for me? Maybe she is, maybe she's not. If she's not, I can keep looking at other people. So for example, maybe Amy's manager, Michael, is he available as a mentor? So it looks like he is, and I can learn a little bit more about Michael. So maybe he's the person I tap on the shoulder. So once I'm ready to tap somebody on the shoulder, I may just simply click book session, and I can basically say, is this online or in person? If it's in person, it's going to be from our San Francisco location. I can pick time and place, or pick one of the things that is already available there. So that would be the workflow of browsing, essentially those that are quote unquote approved to be mentors, and then having a way to tap them on the shoulder without making it look weird. Notice that even though we have thousands of people in this organization, Michael is marked with a mentor badge. So I know he's a mentor, and that's why he shows. Some other people may not. These badges can be customized. So for example, Airbnb would have they call them hosts to play off of their own app. And they can have multiple ones. So for example, host versus a super host. So a super host is somebody who mentored 5 or more people and had 4 and above rating, for example. So you can kind of configure that. So that's kind of like what the mentorship, where I would be browsing for, say, my career mentor would look like. What we can also do is we can bake mentorship to become a buddy system. So for example, if I'm doing engineering onboarding, so in this case, it's a track and it's got a number of steps where I need to do a number of things. There could be a task. So in addition for me taking the boot camp and learning AWS and Docker and all these other things that I need to learn, maybe one of the tasks is go find yourself a mentor. And so by doing this task as the flow of on being onboarded as an engineer, it simply says, you know what, you need to become a mentor. Here's how you do that. You can click on a page, and now it opens up the page that's presumably pre-filtered for that specific set of filters that you're looking for. So in my case, it would be an engineering mentor, presumably. Yeah, so and on the back end, there's a number of reports and data that we can report on how people are learning, who the popular mentors are, what's well, how many sessions and so on. And this becomes important if we're selling our program up and having to justify, hey, what is the mentorship really alive? Why do we care about it? Are people using it? That sort of thing. So that's mentorship in a nutshell. Lots of investments here as well on our part because companies are starting to use it more and more. So super curious if you are saying something that you would love to see as part of the product, but not. So please ping me, or just find the time to connect. And I'd love that. Always love great and crazy ideas when it comes to product development. So with that, that was a quick overview of what mentorship may look like. I want to open it up for questions, comments. Anybody, anything that came out? You can type it if you want in the chat if that works, or you can ask to be brought on stage and you can speak up. Your call. Is the recorded session shared via email? We will, yeah, so it is recorded and we will share the session, I'm sure. I believe it's going to go on YouTube first, and then we can provide you with a link to that for sure. Yeah, cool. And we'll share the deck as well. So, any other questions, comments? I am also available in the Slack channel for for Technocon. So as you join the community, join the Slack. I think that's very valuable. Also, if you have any questions, I posted my email address, so feel free to ping me directly, and look out for an email from us with the this deck and the links to all the stories that we talked about. Yeah. Cool. Well, with that, I'll give you 2 minutes back. I appreciate it. I'm glad that folks are doing a lot around mentorship and coaching, getting a better workplace for everyone. So thank you. Great seeing you around.